New Jersey, so not too far from here. And I went to high school in Brooklyn, and then went to Boston University for my undergraduate degree. I majored in neurobiology and I got a minor in human physiology, all while being on the pre-medical track. And while I was there, I was involved in global medical brigades, a lot of teaching opportunities, and also played club volleyball. So shout out to volleyball, and I still play it today. I used to play with the Rutgers club volleyball team for 2 years before my clinical schedule started to get a little bit more busy. And throughout medical school here, I had decided to pursue general surgery after my third year, which was my clinical year, but I came in knowing that I wanted to do something surgical related. Other than that, outside of school, I like to do things such as volleyball. I'm an avid traveler. I just came back from Acadia National Park, and I know that there are a lot of concerns about time management and work-life balance in medical school, which I can address later. But I can say that I've had plenty of opportunities to travel the country and the world. I also really like photography and editing. If you guys don't know, I also run an Instagram account just to reach out to other pre-medical students and also to try and provide mentorship and advice, just because I feel like mentorship can be so important. And that's something that I unfortunately did not get much of during my undergraduate career. So that's why I'm here. And I will be open to answering any questions that you guys might have.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. I'm going to start off some of these questions. So the first question, with the COVID pandemic, how has being a medical student during the COVID pandemic been different from past years?
Yeah, so it's really changed. Once COVID hit us in March, I think our school and most other medical schools did a really amazing job of pulling all of the medical students out of the hospital and any clinical situations. And they converted the preclinical clerkships to Zoom and online classes only. So I think, I definitely appreciate that they pulled us out. It's a very dangerous situation. But on the other hand, it did affect our clinical coursework. And there were some fears that it would delay graduation and also matching into whatever specialty we wanted this year. But the administration has worked with us on that, and they've decreased the amount of elective weeks we needed to graduate. They made all the courses COVID pass fail, so just like all the people would be on an equal playing field, and applying to residency programs wouldn't be so much affected by it. But since May or June, once Jersey, the COVID cases in Jersey had started to go down, they allowed us to go back into the hospitals. So since May, I've had classmates and myself, we've gone back to the hospitals, and we were not allowed to see any COVID patients. We were not allowed to see any people who had fevers or anything that could resemble COVID. So I think they've done an excellent job of taking our concerns into account and our feedback and maintaining our safety while providing that education.
That sounds great. It sounds like RWJ has done a really great job actually with handling COVID. So I know that you've chosen general surgery for your residency. Is there any specific reason as to why you chose general surgery? And could you explain that a little bit?
Sure. This is an answer that I've been preparing and trying to articulate because I think this is one of the most common questions I'll get on the interview trail. But I think it's a number of reasons for me. My first exposure to medicine and surgery was actually through my grandfather. And I think most people who go into medicine may have a personal story of doing so, and mine was through him. He suffered from lung cancer, and he had a major operation that took out basically half of his lung. And because of that, he was able to live a little while longer. And I just felt like my family had relief through that, to be able to spend a little bit more time with him. I was able to get to know him better. And he was always a professor that taught me to stay curious throughout my life, and to ask questions, and just to be a lifelong learner. And so I think that was what really set me off into medicine and surgery in general. But I think what attracts me to surgery is that there's a gratification to curing a disease process or helping a patient regain some function or just prolonging a patient's life or its quality. That's something that has been very rewarding, just being in clinical and seeing and caring for a patient with breast cancer, and seeing what they were like before their surgery, during their surgery, and seeing how happy they were after the surgery. Also, I think that our personalities, just my personality and surgeons, match very well. I think I'm very organized, type A. I really, really strive to be the best that I can be. And that's something that resonated with me through the residents and attendings that I've worked with. And also, I think a big part of it is just through my interactions and mentorships with these attendings. They really, really taught me well and wanted the best out of me. And so I think I just vibed with the fact that they were so good to me, and I just wanted to be the best version of myself I could for them. So yeah, and I think in surgery, there's an element of medicine as well as surgery. So I get to have a combination of both, which I wouldn't get if I were to pursue something like family medicine or emergency medicine. But I like the fact that I'm able to use my hands to do something during surgery, but also take care of a patient's medical problems before and afterwards in the hospital. And so I think it's really a culmination of multiple factors that led me to pursue it.
Okay, thank you. And along your idea of mentorship, I know you also have your Instagram account that's widely known. And so how has that influenced your journey as a medical student? You know, why have you decided to start your motivational Instagram, and you know, how has that helped you throughout your journey?
Right. I think pre-med can be such a difficult time. It's a difficult track. I'm sure you guys all know and take difficult courses. It's a very hard time because you're expected to be perfect. Like, it's so competitive to get into medical school. And sometimes not a lot of your friends or classmates know the struggle. And I think just by me going through my pre-med journey at Boston University, I didn't receive a lot of the mentorship that I wanted. I didn't have a point of contact person where I could ask questions or relay my concerns to. And so I wanted to create an outlet for other applicants, for other people from other universities who are in the same situation, and kind of be a person who can answer the questions and relieve some concerns. And I think it's helped me throughout my medical school journey because it is a hobby that I've kept going on with, and I've always been told to not let go of my hobbies. So it's helped me in terms of work-life balance. And I think it's also humbled me and made me super appreciative of what I have and the achievements I've accomplished. And I just want to help more people achieve their dreams.
And then also, so looking back during your undergraduate years as a pre-med, I think right now we're actually going through that. I'm a sophomore, so I'm currently in the, I would say the biggest part of your pre-med journey would be like sophomore, junior year. And so then what is one piece of advice or multiple pieces of advice that you would give to your past undergraduate, like pre-medical self?
Mhm. I would tell myself not to be stubborn in terms of trying to figure out a problem by myself, trying to like study by myself and really seek help. I used to be a very like just like very confident person, and that I didn't want to seek help from others. I didn't want to seem weak, but really once I started to ask help from my classmates, from TAs, or going to office hours, I realized that it was like, one, more time efficient, two, I learned the material so much better, and three, I started to develop more in terms of communication and just putting myself out there and just developing a lot of core skills and qualities that I think make someone a good student, a good resident, and probably a good future physician. I think that humility is something that will carry you a long way, and that in undergrad, it's a good time to start asking for help when you need it.
Okay, thank you. And then also, so when pursuing a career in medicine, so what do you think are the top things that we as pre-med students should avoid? And then what do you think are the most important things that we should be doing to prepare for medical school and prepare for, that journey?
What was the first part? Things you shouldn't avoid?
Things you should avoid.
Oh, should avoid. Um, well, that's a hard one. I don't know. Like things you should. I'll answer the second part first. I think that right now, especially as you're in your sophomore year and junior year, what's important is that you show your interest in medicine. And I know that it could be hard during COVID times to do shadowing or volunteer at your local soup kitchen or even in the hospital in general. Um, but what I think is important is like doing outreach to those places and seeing if they have any opportunities for online things if they don't have it in person. Um, just really making sure that if you're doing research now, that you keep working on that research and you don't stop midway. I think what med schools like to see is consistency. So just keep on doing what you're doing, and if you're not really a big research person, that's also okay. But I will say that a lot of the programs in the country have some sort of research oriented focus, and they would like to see a little bit of research from the applicants if possible. But if you have other things that you're pursuing or other interests, that's also something that can really make your application stand out. Things to avoid on this journey, I think just college can be a very interesting time where you explore new things, do things that you normally wouldn't do. And I would just say, like, just think of your future self and try to avoid things that you think would bite you in the back 5, 10 years down the line. Um, I mean, I'm certainly like I went through college once before. I, had the time of my life, experimented, had fun with my friends, but just make sure that you always have a handle and control on those things, because you would really hate for yourself to work so hard and then something like that bites you in the back during applications, or like if you get like a warning or whatever they put it in your college folder, like if you get written up for underage drinking, stuff like that. Um, Avoid that or just be smart about it.
So we have a couple questions in the chat, actually, kind of a lot, but that's okay. So we'll just go down the list. So Manor, I hope I'm pronouncing that right, asks, does RWJMS value research heavily?
I don't think they value research heavily because I wasn't that heavy on research. I certainly did maybe 150 hours or 200 hours, something really basic like that, just so that I can have it on my application and check it off. But I did not have any publications, any abstracts, no presentations. It was just the pure research experience. And I will say that it did not come up much in my interviews, maybe like 2 or 3 of them. But what they were really interested in were my teaching experience and my background as a volleyball player. So I think it just really depends on how you cater your application. So for me, I selected those as my most important experiences. And if you don't know, on the application, you can select up to 3 of your most significant experiences and then kind of write and talk about those a little bit more. So in short, I think no, Robert Wood is not one of those that require a lot of research, but if you're trying to go for a top 20 program like Stanford, Harvard, Columbia, I think most of their applicants they're going to be interviewing have some sort of research background or publications.
Okay, thank you. Next question from Zaina. She asks, what are some important factors to consider while choosing what schools to apply to?
I think one factor would definitely be the location, and it goes on both ends. You don't want to be somewhere or in a city where you don't see yourself living for the next 4 years, but also schools are going to be asking you why you chose to like apply to a school in Missouri when you have no relatives, you don't know anything about that place or have been there when you're from New Jersey or New York. So I think location is an important factor. I think price is also a really important factor. So in-state tuition can make the biggest difference. For example, I'm an in-state student, and I probably save around $30,000 a year compared to other private institutions outside of the state. Also, another thing I would research is their rank list or their match list, because if you already have a certain interest, say you're interested in obstetrics and gynecology, you want to make sure that that medical school you're going to has put out students to well-known institutions, um, and they successfully match their students into that specialty. Um, I think other things that might play a role is if they have opportunities to take gap years during medical school. If you're really interested in Masters of Public Health or Masters in Education, some schools will allow you to take a year off and pursue that. And I think most schools do that. Robert Wood is certainly one that does that. So yeah, it's just you need to know, do some self-digging and what you're looking for in your medical school and where you see yourself 5 to 10 years down the line, and kind of do some research on schools you're applying to.
Okay. Helen then asks, do you feel like you were at an advantage going into medical school, knowing generally what specialty you wanted to go into?
I actually feel like it could be a disadvantage because you might be asked the question, like, how do you know for sure you're interested in this specialty? And being a pre-medical student, you really haven't had any exposure besides shadowing. So it's hard for you to know the day-to-day life, what kind of patients they see, what kind of surgeries they do, for example. So I think it could be disadvantaged to close yourself off on an interview question like that. I think interviewers like to see that you're open-minded and that you're willing to explore other specialties, but I think it's okay to let them know that you're interested in one specialty because of certain past experiences, but just don't close yourself off to that yet. I came into medical school knowing that I wanted to do neurosurgery, and then I did 2 weeks of it during my third year, and I quickly decided to go the other way. So definitely, I think someone told me about 60 to 70% of people change their minds at least once during that school.
Okay. And then Sarah asks, what was your interviewing process like when you applied into med school? And how is your prep or the process any different now that you are pursuing residency?
Yeah, that's a great question. So before COVID times, all the interviews were in person. So during my senior year, and I think I saw someone ask if I did a gap year. So I didn't do a gap year. So most of my interviews were during my senior year of college. It required me to take off a lot of days off of class, to fly across the country, to do car rides to like states that were 4 to 5 hours away. But once we got there, we would most likely have like a pre-interview dinner or some kind of event the day before. And then the morning of the interview, it could be from like 8 a.m. to 3 p.m., just the basic breakfast, lectures from the deans and the faculty. And then we would be interviewing with anywhere from 2 to 4 interviewers. And it'd be one-on-one interviews, or there's some schools that do group interviews, which to me sounds terrible. And then there's some schools that do MMI, which is multiple mini interviews, and Robert Wood Johnson is actually a school that does that. And what that comprises is just multiple stations of questions, of prompts. You read it, and then you go into the room and you tell the person your answer. So it's almost like a game, speed dating, and those are the 3 interview formats that I know of. And so my interview process was mostly October to January. And then I made the decision in like April, decided to sit on a wait list for 2 months. And then by the end of it, I was like, I'm done. I need to find a living situation. So I'm just going to make a decision. And for now, the residency process is a little bit different because, well, one, the application is slightly less detailed, which is great. And 2, I think with virtual interviews, it's difficult to assess the program's culture, getting to know the residents who are there, whether they love it, whether they hate it, and just seeing the hospital and the city that you might be living in for the next 5 to 7 years. As for prep, I'm basically doing the same thing I did for med school interviews. I'm looking over my application, thinking about questions that they could possibly be asking me, being sure that I can explain stuff on my application, and like getting my room set up for the interview, I guess, like making sure I have a room light, good lighting, stuff like that.
Okay, thank you. And so when you were applying to medical school during your undergrad, did you take a gap year? Ahmed asks if you took a gap year and if you did, what you did during that year. And then if you didn't take a gap year, how did you balance, your coursework during your undergraduate, but then also, handling the application process for medical school?
Yeah, I did not take a gap year, and I've been asked that question before about whether I regretted it or not. And sometimes I really do feel like I regret the decision not to take a gap year, just because I feel like I could have used that year to do research, to really explore the world, to do things that I wanted to do. Um, but knowing that med school takes up a lot of my time, um, I know a lot of my friends who took gap years, 2 gap years, did research, volunteer, and really did everything to boost their applications. And they had the time of their lives, and they would not go back and change it for anything. And I actually do think the trend these days is to take gap years. I think like 70% of applicants might take a gap year. Um, so that being said, applying during my junior year of college was pretty stressful. I think I had to study for the MCAT during the spring of my junior year. So I took it in May. And just on top of all the coursework, that was a lot to handle. But I think because I was studying for biochem during my junior year, I was studying for physics. I think a lot of that cross-translated for MCAT and my coursework. So I think in the end, it's definitely doable. You just have to have the time management skills and priority to really focus on your MCAT studying. I think if you do decide to take your MCAT junior year and apply, you might have to sacrifice some of your social life, not much of it, but just like making sure that you balance it with MCAT studying and prioritizing that. Was there another part of that question?
No, I think you answered that question. Thank you. And then Natanya asks, okay, I'll ask the first part of the question. How did you balance traveling and medical school while also at the same time, managing your finances, since it can become a balancing act financially?
So part of that answer is most medical schools these days have podcasts, or you can just tune in online. So I will say, like, when you're looking into medical schools, you should see if one, they're pass fail, because that takes stress off a lot of the preclinical coursework, and two, see if they podcast or upload their lectures online. Because then if you don't have any mandatory things or required sessions, you can just basically take off, go somewhere, go to different states or travel to a different country. So those are two things that you could look for. As for the finances, so my mom always told me to work hard, play hard, and not really worry about finances, because in my mind, I was like, I'm going to be able to pay back these loans eventually one day. And I would rather look back when I'm 30 and 40, knowing that I had the energy and the time to travel, but not necessarily finances, rather than being 30 or 40 years old and having the finances, but not the time or energy. So that's how I viewed it. I used some of my financial aid that was, I guess, like left over because I was in state, to like budget traveling. So it's definitely doable. And if you do really like traveling, you could use some of your financial aid to do it. Like, don't feel bad about it.
Okay, and then Tanya also asks, so now that you've experienced both pre-med and medical school, which experience do you prefer more and why?
I think I definitely prefer medical school more, because it's just the fact that you're at this like penultimate part. You're like so close to being a medical doctor and doing what you sought out to do in the first place. And I think you're learning more of what is relevant to your future patients. You're actually seeing patients in the hospital and you're helping them. You're caring for them while they're sick. And I think it's always a nice reminder to be able to, be part of that patient care, and see how much it means to them. And there's been multiple times when I've seen patients dealt with families, and I just remind myself that all of the coursework in pre-med was worth it. All the past 2 years of studying in med school were worth it, because now, you kind of see what that culmination is in front of you. And so I think that's why I definitely prefer medical school more. It's definitely harder and more time consuming, but I think undergrad and the first 2 years of med school does a good job of ramping you up in terms of what you're able to handle. Um, so yeah.
And, with your pre-med experiences, did you always know that you wanted to go into the medical field? And like, if you did beforehand, did you have any doubts during your pre-med years where you wanted to, maybe change off course or, explore a different career path?
No, so I was really boring. I kind of just stuck to it. I think I'm the type of person to, once I like make my mind on something, it's very hard for me to get off of that track. And so the same thing with medicine. Once I was on the pre-med track, like by sophomore and junior year, it was almost like too late for me to change my mind. So I just thought to myself, well, like if there's no reason for me to change, if there's no factors that um, like are going to change my mind to pursue another career, then I'll just go forward with it and see where that takes me.
Okay, and Jay asks, he is a current candidate in this cycle, and he wanted to get a better sense of the Asian Pacific American community at RWJMS. So if you could, explain that or talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I there is a PAMSA chapter at Rebel Wood, and for that, I don't think there's a mentorship program um, in the medical school per se, but what the PAMSA chapter at our school is basically just having lunch lectures, and people come in to talk about their experiences as an Asian Pacific American healthcare provider, and just give like certain lectures on topics that they study. But there are definitely a lot of programs in our school that have linked mentorship programs to them. So, for example, American Medical Association has a Synapse program, I think, that pair us with one of the Rutgers undergraduates. And I did do that. Um, there's also a bunch of other chapters that do mentorship for undergrads as well. And I think what that has done in terms of bolstering my journey is that it's giving me a platform or passion um, to talk about during interviews, and it's shown me that this is something that I want to do in my daily life. Like 10 years from now, I do want to continue mentoring and teaching medical students or residents when I am finally in attending, probably like 8 years from now. So I think it's given me a lot of clarity on where I see myself in 10 years.
Okay, thank you. And Manor has another question. So, they say, I've heard that medical school students say that an application should have an overall story. So specifically a common theme that ties all your activities together. So what advice would you have on, finding your story or your theme for your application?
I think that has a lot to do with introspection and um, like just being really deep with yourself and asking like what are your most significant experiences, life stories, or things you've done in college that have really spoken to you or made a lasting impact on you. For some people it could be their 1,000 hours volunteering in a soup kitchen and interacting with those people, or it can be part of leadership in something like a PAMSA and like what that has brought for you. Or for others, it could be like athletics. Like for me, I centered my application around how volleyball has a lot of similarities to medicine and how the teamwork and communication can go kind of hand in hand, like the stuff you see in medicine, and just creating and crafting a story around it. I will say definitely took a lot of time, a lot of Googling and like searching for stuff on how volleyball is related to medicine. But I think you just need to like look at yourself, your portfolio, your CV, and find the things that make you excited. Um, and it'll definitely show when you're talking about it in your interviews how excited you are to be part of that. And then you can just go about crafting your story based on that and tying all your other activities kind of with that centerpiece in mind.
And I know that Rutgers and other universities in America also have, I guess you would call them early assurance programs or fast forward programs where you can apply to medical school basically your sophomore or junior year and already know if you're
Yeah.
getting into that program. So I was just wondering, so I mean, since you're taking the traditional route, why you decided against applying to those types of programs, or if you
Yeah.
ever considered it.
Yeah, I definitely considered it. BU had that same, I think, like 8-year early assurance program, and I did apply for it, and I didn't get in, which I think in the end was a good thing, or just me like making up excuses like, oh, it's fine, I didn't get in, whatever. But I think my thought process back then was that I didn't want to limit myself in terms of location, in terms of my potential. And honestly, like I wanted to see the world a little bit or go to a different place for a while. And so I it ended up being a good thing for me because I was able to go on interviews, see the country a little bit, learn about different programs, where I fit in, what types of programs I wouldn't fit in at, and just like get to know other applicants as well. But I know I have a few classmates who did that early assurance program here, who loved it and would never go back and change their minds. Yeah, it's definitely like you get a lot off your chest if you're able to do that and get accepted, I will say. It saves a lot of stress.
Okay, and Sarah asks, so how many med schools did you apply to in your cycle? And did you ever consider DO?
I think I applied to 20, 25, and then I ended up getting interviews at 8 of those places, but I never considered DO. My advisor told me that there wasn't really a need for me to consider DO unless I was really interested in the like osteopathic manipulation and the coursework that they offer at DO schools. And honestly, to me, I didn't know much about OMM, or I think it stands for like osteopathic manipulation and something. And so I just didn't do any further research on it because my mentor told me that like I was okay for an MD program.
Okay, thank you. And if anyone else has any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat or you can unmute yourself. Um,
I'll leave my email in the box too.
oh, okay, we have one more question from Nivedita. Sorry if I'm not saying that correctly. So she asked, how do you think being a part of the Asian Pacific Islander community will or has had an impact on your career in medicine?
I think it will have a big impact on my career just because I think my story can relate to a lot of people out there who grew up not proud of their heritage, not knowing much of their heritage, or just being ashamed of being children of immigrants, and not really having much. And I know for me and a lot of my friends, education was a big factor that was emphasized in our family. I was always told to work hard. I was always like yelled at for not getting like good grades. And so growing up in that kind of community, it was hard for me to really accept the fact that I was Chinese or be proud of it. And so I think being a part of a PAMSA throughout medical school has allowed me to network with a lot of physicians who were in similar situations with me and just learn about how they became so proud of who they were. And I think going forward as a physician, I want to empower other medical students, other pre-medical students to just own their heritage. And I think that's one of the things that I really focused on during my residency applications is my strength and like diversity, and what I bring to the table, being the child of immigrants, amongst other things. And so I think surgery and medicine in general is changing to become more diverse, and I think that being part of a PAMSA will be one part of that.
Oh, Sarah also asks, as pre-med motivation on Instagram, what advice would you have to stay motivated, especially now with everything being online with Zoom?
Yeah, I can only imagine how hard it is with everything online. I mean, I was always the type of person to only be engaged when I was in class, and it'd be really hard for me to like do stuff by myself. But what I found worked for me was just like writing down my goals and where I see myself in 1 year, in 2 years, and just kind of having that on the back of your wallpaper or like somewhere close by. Just because I know that in these times it's hard to kind of refocus and recenter yourself on what you value. I think having some reminders around you would be definitely helpful. Um, Also, if you're having trouble staying motivated because everything's online, or you just don't want to study, I've told people that you can do anything in small increments of time. So you don't have to study for 3 hours in a row. You could just do a few sessions of 30 minutes, and that will, in the end, like be more beneficial. Um, I'll try to think of other advice to stay motivated, but that's kind of like all I have right now.
Navidita asked, do you still play volleyball in medical school? Or was it just
I
bad?
I played my M1 to I played my M1 and M2 year. And then my third year of medical school, when we go into the hospital and our schedules are kind of wacky, I didn't have as much time to play volleyball in medical school. But my first and second years, I was pretty involved with the Rutgers undergrad club team. We went to nationals 1 year, and like I participated in tournaments. And it was just like nice to have outside of school like a separate family or cohort of friends with the shared interests. And it got my mind off of studying and allowed me to work on that work-life balance. And I think that's really important, is to have that.
Sarah also asks, is just curious about what position you play in volleyball.
I was an outside hitter.
Nice.
Yeah. I feel like it's a good position because the outside hitter is the one that like gets gets the team out of trouble if the ball's like not passed well or the setter can't get to the ball. So I think it's a high pressure position, but it's also very worth it because you work well under pressure, you have resilience, and you really have the opportunity to be a leader and be like that mental and emotional support for the team.
And Manora asks, so is M1 and M2 similar to undergrad? And how are they different?
I thought it was pretty similar because it's just coursework. You go to class, take notes, take exams, but the amount of information that's given to you is a lot. You might have heard that med school is like drinking water through a fire hose, and I definitely do think that could be the case sometimes um, with these courses. And the only other difference I can think of in M1 and M2 year is that you're given some clinical responsibilities. You're allowed to go to the hospital, or we call them offsites. So you get to like interact with patients, do patient interviews, and kind of learn the art of medicine, what kinds of questions you would ask patients, and really start to develop our empathy and compassion. And we also have a thing called patient-centered medicine, which is just talking about like how to be a good physician.
And so is RWJ, is there coursework related to pass fail or is there a grade system? And if it is pass fail, do you think that would be more or less pressure compared to undergrad where you have that GPA versus with pass fail you either pass the class or you don't?
Yeah. So RWJ, the first 2 years are pass fail, and you just need a 70% average or exam score to pass. And I think what the focus of that is that it's no longer a cutthroat environment where you're competing with your classmates or competing against the curve to get the A or the best grade. So the hope is that you are able to collaborate with your classmates and work together, help improve them in any way possible, and just really be able to like ask your classmates anything without the fear of them being cutthroat to you. So in my experience, I think it's been very collaborative. All of my study exam sessions have been with classmates, and it's like very different studying with classmates than studying by yourself. Um, One, it's less lonely. Two, you have more people to talk to and have breaks to gossip or get coffee or whatever. And three, it just kind of makes the medical school journey more worth it, I guess, and cohesive.
And going off of that, I know undergrad is obviously not just STEM students and, pre-med students. So did you ever have, friends that you would study with that didn't have the same coursework, and how did you deal with that? And then also with pre-med, did you ever have any encounters with, people that would also be, cutthroat or of that manner?
Yeah. Um, as a pre-med, I did often study with friends outside of STEM because I thought it was refreshing. They were able to bring in different perspectives, and I was often very curious about what they were learning and how they felt about their coursework. Um, Sometimes it's so easy for us people who are pre-med to say like, "Oh my gosh, my life is so hard," but then it adds perspective when you see someone struggling with biomedical engineering or architecture, and it's kind of like the shared struggle. And I think just having that perspective is nice, and branching out to people who are in other fields is helpful not only now but also in the future, just for networking purposes. Um, and two, yes, I've worked with people who are pretty cutthroat. They're the types of people who try to sabotage you or give you the wrong answer, things like that. And um, I think I've done a pretty good job of keeping those people out of my life. Anytime they would want to study with me, I would just have to politely decline, or just come up with fake reasons not to study with them. Um, but yeah, those are the kind of people that I think bring toxicity into my life or more stress, and so I would just stay away from that.
Okay. Jay asks, regarding RWJMS's focus, particularly, what does the school look for in candidates? And additionally, is there a central theme that the school strives for or strives towards?
I can't really pinpoint one central theme that the school looks for. I've had classmates that went the research route, have plenty of research things. I've had other people who are mothers or like were airplane fighters in the Air Force. So I think they're just looking for people who would diversify the experience at Rebel with Johnson and like have different life experiences. So it's hard to answer that question. I can't really say if there's a central theme. Um, as for what the school strives towards, again, it's a mix of both. There's people that will strive towards research, and then at our school, there's a lot of opportunities to serve underrepresented communities, and I think there's always a cohort of students who make that a central part of the application, and those are the people who will most likely serve on those organizations.
Okay, and Manor asks, during the pre-med journey, many people face setbacks or downfalls, like, such as a bad grade, a withdrawal from a course, or a bad MCAT score. So what advice would you have to, bounce back and recenter yourself?
I think having a good social support who are like in with your journey and who know that you're like trying to go for medical school is important, um, because those are the people you're typically going to go to when you have a bad day or when you just need to vent something off your chest. And so I think finding that support system and having them around is super important when you have a setback. I think you also need to normalize failure and having setbacks. And this was something that I had to learn, that not everything's going to be perfect. You can't be the top student in every class. There's so many more people there that are smarter than you or more talented than you. And you just need to know that that's okay. Um, you just need to try your best and be the best version of yourself you can possibly be. And that's all anyone can ask for at the end of the day. And also just knowing what you want to do and your goals for yourself, I think can help you with that bounce back. So, you can make small goals. If I got a 70 on an exam, you can, make goals to try and bring it up to an 80. You don't have to be too hard on yourself.
Okay, and Zaina B asks, in your M3 and M4 years, along with grades, did your attending have any impact on whether or not you would pass?
So the M3 and M4 grades at our school are a two-part component. One is your clinical grade, which is evaluated by your attendings and the residents that you worked with, and also a shelf grade, which is just the end of a rotation exam that we take that's standardized across the country. And so you have to get our grading system is honors, high pass, pass, and fail. So you would have to get honors on both portions to get a final grade of honors, or you would get the lower of the two. So yeah, I would say yes, the attending did have an impact on my grade. They were the ones who gave me that clinical portion of the grade, and they're also the ones that write the comments on basically like my dean's letter.
And because of COVID-19, has there been any change in the grading system, especially with clinicals now that they aren't in person as much anymore?
Yeah, so some schools have just moved it to pass fail, which I think is a disadvantage, especially if your school had a system like honors and high pass, because once residency programs see that, they might think that you actually only got the pass instead of it being due to COVID. But our school has made a special designation to call it COVID pass fail. And I think they write a little sentence that this was because we changed our entire grading scale. But we still have the end of clerkship exam that we take. And if you do well enough on it, it will show up on your comments, like you scored blank percentile.
Okay, and Sarah asks, so how did you study for your MCAT? And did you do anything differently studying for your UCMLE?
So the MCAT was majority. I bought the Princeton Review book. I like read it back to front, did all the questions, and I did that like hand in hand with whatever coursework I was doing. So if I was in biochemistry, I would review the part of the Princeton Review book that we had just covered in class. And that was a way for me to review both for my coursework and also get ready for the MCAT. I did lots of practice questions. I know there's lots of different test banks out there, and I know UWorld has come out with a test bank. But I will say, like, what's important is just sticking to a test bank and doing as many questions as you can, and then take a few practice exams. I would say more than two. I only took two, and that was awful because it wasn't a strong predictor or indicator, and I would just be so stressed because I'm not in my score range, but also I didn't have the time to take more practice exams. So I would definitely suggest taking more, just so you have that stamina, you have a better predictor, and you get more exposure to different types of questions. As for the USMLE, I studied, it's basically a culmination of 2 years of coursework. So we have all these resources. There's a book called First Aid, which is just little summaries of everything. We have a whole UWorld question bank with 3,000 questions. And so my mindset was preparing for my classes would help me prepare for step one. And then we have another thing called dedicated during our second year med school, where you take time off of everything. You just completely pause your life to study for this exam. And some people take eight weeks, some people take 6 weeks or shorter. So for 5.5 weeks, I woke up every morning at a set time and just did 120 questions every day, read books, and it was really, really hard time, but yeah, it's easier when you're there struggling with your classmates. So I will say the studying is a little bit different for USMLE.
And Manor asks, when applying to med schools, what would you say is the best way to portray setbacks or downfalls along your pre-med journey?
I think it's definitely important to own up to those setbacks and failures. For example, I have been preparing for that question as well because not all applicants are perfect. There's definitely going to be that question, and how I would respond to it honestly would just be like, yes, that's a failure that I own up to, and blank, blank, blank is the reason. And from that experience, I've learned maybe not to overestimate my abilities or my intellect and to study more or to spend more time on certain subjects. And ever since that setback or failure, these have been the results of that, or these have been my exam scores.
Okay, and sorry, going back to the MCAT, when did you actually start studying for it?
So originally my MCAT was scheduled for April 20th of my junior year, so I started studying for it like in January. But then because of we like went to volleyball nationals and there was just like a lot of school stuff going on, I ended up postponing it to after we came back from a global medical brigade. So I postponed it to like late May. Um, so I had about 4 to 5 months of time to study for it.
Okay, and then Zainab asks, you said that you didn't take a gap year, but would you recommend taking one now, or not, and why?
Um, the decision is ultimately up to you, but I would say if I were to go back to my younger self, I would strongly recommend or urge myself to take a gap year just because there's no rush. Um, most people who matriculate into medical school these days are averaging at 24 years old. And there was no reason for me to start medical school at 20 years old. Like I couldn't even go to a bar. So like honestly, take your time if you want to do things that interest you, if you want to explore the world or just I don't know, go crazy, go volunteer somewhere, go work for a few years. Like that is all valuable life experience that will only make you a stronger applicant. Nobody's going to take that as a red flag. Nobody's going to say, oh, you took 2 years to do research or you took 2 years to volunteer. Why did you do that? That's all valuable stuff that'll make you more interesting as a person.
And going along with the fact that med school is literally during our prime 20-year old age, did you ever have any, I wouldn't say regrets, but did you ever have, I guess, moments of FOMO where you were, your other friends are going out but you're inside studying while in med school?
Yeah, definitely. And like going back to club volleyball, for example, when we were at nationals, and my friends would be out, just like doing shenanigans and hanging out. Me and one of my volleyball teammates who was also doing the application cycle with me were in the hotel room studying after games. And we definitely missed out on a lot of social opportunities, a lot of family time. And so I wouldn't call it like regret, but it would just be just like opportunities that I missed out on and just life experiences and fun moments that I will never be a part of, inside jokes that I will never understand. So there's definitely a lot of those, but I think you just you'll come. I think you'll come to terms with it that the journey to this ultimate goal of being a physician and helping others is going to pay off in the end.
Okay, thank you so much again, Stephen, for coming to speak with us. If anyone else has any last minute questions, feel free to put them in the chat or unmute your mic. But we've come to the end of this meeting, so let me just share my screen. So these are our socials and our QR codes. So we have our mailing list, our GroupMe, our Instagram, and our Facebook. And I also have Stephen's medical motivation Instagram and his personal accounts here. I'm going to put them in the chat too. And if you guys have any other questions, feel free to email us at ruapams@gmail.com. Sorry, there's a typo there. Or DM us or, just ask us questions in the GroupMe. But thank you again, everyone, for coming out. And yeah, so that's it.
Thanks, everyone.